I'm going to tell you a little bit about our beliefs before I tell you about one of the products that Jeff just mentioned, Brilliance. We believe several things. One is that no matter what your income level is, you should have a choice about your products, meaning they shouldn't just be given to you or necessarily donated. And we believe that no matter your income level, you want a beautiful product. And this drives our philosophy at D-Rev, the organization I lead, and we believe that products should be economically sustainable, meaning that when we develop products, we want them to be purchased. And once they reach users, they continue to be purchased, sustained on the market, and ideally scaled. And because we're talking about design today, I'm going to walk you through the story of one of our products and give you a little bit of background on the need, our approach and what we hope is a solution, and then what does that mean going forward. So this is a picture of Ben. I'm going to start with this. And Ben's having tea with a colleague in India. And those of you who've been to India, you know you drink a lot of tea and you're sitting around quite a bit. Ben was at a medical device conference when an Indian doctor approached him and said, I see a lot of products here, but they're all very expensive. And we need something very affordable to treat something that you in the West don't think is a big deal, jaundice. Ben was intrigued by this, and the doctor told him more. And what he said is that in India, most babies are born at home, in fact, between 50 and 60%. And a mother will give birth. She'll start nursing the child. But after several days, the child may stop nursing. And often she doesn't know what's wrong with the child. So she may think about going to a local clinic. And then this really isn't always an option, and it's because of this. Several of the very small clinics, often called primary health care centers, the doctors, they're paid by the government, but that's not where they necessarily want to be. So they'll have a practice in town, a private practice, and it's illegal. So the public clinic that you see here is unmanned 6 days a week. So the mother, not knowing what's wrong with her child, often won't go here. And this is a picture of a clinic actually just about an hour outside of Delhi. And if you look closely, you can see that actually several of the windows are broken. So what are her options? She'll go to a larger clinic, a community health clinic. And in this case, with this story, it's a very good clinic with a very good doctor. And these are actual clinics and actual doctors. And what often will happen is that the doctor will suspect in this case, if it's jaundice, she'll suspect because she'll do a clinical assessment. And what that means is looking at the skin tone of the child to see how yellow the child is. And the picture you're looking at is an actual hand-drawn poster on the wall from a clinic. And it's showing where the yellow in the body of the newborn relates to what a lab facility would show for testing. And it's because there aren't lab facilities. Or often when we're talking to doctors, what we hear is that there's a lab facility, but they actually don't trust the results. Jaundice is actually very easy to treat. How many parents do we have here? Okay, and I'm a parent too. And how many of you had children with jaundice? Okay, good. So this is statistically about right on, and you'll see why in a minute. But to treat jaundice, severe jaundice, all you need to do is shine blue light on the skin of a newborn. And it breaks down a neurotoxin in the blood called bilirubin. And the child needs to be treated for about 2 to 3 days on average, only interrupted for feeding. Now, at a clinic, even some of the very good clinics, there's either no treatment or you see a device like this. This is a homemade phototherapy device. And this is pretty typical. We'll see this in maybe 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 clinics or hospitals, at least in India and East and West Africa. And in general, they're not effective. So what will a mother do? She'll now go on to an urban hospital or a district hospital, which is a regional center. And this is an example one. This is actually a large pediatric hospital in a major Indian city. When we were doing our fieldwork, and we've been probably in over 200 hospitals and clinics, we had a very surprising finding. When we started this, the doctor that first spoke to Ben talked about how there was this need close to the homes, out close to the village. But when we visited urban hospitals, we actually found that 90% of them did not have effective phototherapy, the blue light, in these urban hospitals. And what you see is something like this. And you can see these are white bulbs. And several of them are actually burned out. So white light, I know, how many scientists and engineers do we have here? Oh my goodness, a few. Okay, good. So white light has blue light in its spectrum, but the intensity is often not high enough to treat a child. The other thing we see, and these children are healthy other than having severe jaundice, we see bulbs burned out. So there's 6 bulbs on the phototherapy device you're looking at now, and 3 of them are burned out. So the child on the left is actually not getting the treatment it needs. So I want to step back for a minute. So hold this thought, because I'm talking about the problem, but I want to step back and give you a little context about my approach to product design and how I think about it, and what from my background shaped this. So I spent several years in Kenya designing water pumps. And the one you can see here is a treadle pump, and it works like a stair-stepping machine. And then I also spent some time in Iraq working on electricity reconstruction. And I don't want you to take the smile in this picture as a sign of bravery, because it certainly wasn't. But I learned two key lessons from both of these experiences, and that is, you can design a technology, but if it doesn't get somewhere, it does no good. So a water pump, it can be the best water pump in the world, but if it doesn't reach the farmer, the crops aren't going to be grown. And you can repair or reconstruct a power plant, but that doesn't necessarily mean that when the dusk comes and someone flips on a light switch, that the light will come on. So this got me thinking about design, particularly in the social impact sector. And my sense is that there's too much of a focus on the technology. So the phototherapy device, or the pump, or the power plant, when we don't talk enough about the impact and what that means to the design process. So I'm going to walk you through how I see the design process. So you have design, the design of the thing, but then you also have delivery. How does it get from wherever it's made to the end user? And then not only get there, how does it get used and continue to get used? What's the servicing involved? What's the maintenance? But before you even get to that, you need to think about, what's the problem? Do we understand the problem? Have we identified the need? And then when we're designing products, we don't just design for one hospital or one farmer. We're designing for many. And particularly with social impact, we're trying to design very affordable products. So how can we scale these to hit millions or even hundreds of millions of people? And because I work in social impact, we want to be able to measure it. Are we, in fact, developing products that are reaching our achieved goals? And so this is how we define design and how we're approaching it at D-Rev. And those of you who are designers know that, well, it looks very neat in this nice era. It's actually this very messy process, because hopefully you're iterating. And one of the things we've learned is, okay, if you're designing for scale, you actually need to think about it at the very beginning. If you're designing for maintenance, you need to think about it from the very beginning. So we actually we ask 4 questions when we're designing products. And we found that these 4 questions don't just help us in designing our products, but also in understanding the landscape in which we're working. So the questions are, is it needed? Does it work? And by is it needed, is the technology needed, or is the product needed? Does it work? Will it get to those who need it? And will the users use it correctly? So I'm going to walk through that. Is it needed? So I remember I asked you how many of you had children and how many of you had children with jaundice. So about 60% of all children have some degree of jaundice. About 12%, however, need treatment. The number is actually a little bit higher in the developing world. It's about 17%, and it's primarily because of lack of neonatal care. So we know it's a need. We knew that anecdotally. Does it work? Well, we know right now that the need is not being met. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. This is a picture from Obamashaw, Nigeria. It's a public hospital. And what you see in the back, the gentleman is pulling a device off the top of an incubator. It's a Western device that costs about $4,000. It actually costs more if you were to buy it in country. Usually these are donated. But it only worked for 2 weeks because there was a voltage surge, and it stopped working. Will the product get to those who need it? So this is a picture of the baby. His name is Johnson, and this is his mother, and they live in Tamil Nadu. And we met them actually when we were visiting different clinics and trying to talk to some of the patients. And because we have felt like you don't want to necessarily talk to mothers when their children are in life-threatening situations, we actually look for parents whose children have been successfully treated, and then we go and talk to them. And this was one mother, and she told us that she went to 6 clinics and hospitals before she got to a hospital that actually had good phototherapy and could treat her child. Will they use it correctly? Will the medical staff use the device correctly? So this is another picture of, this is a triple-sided phototherapy device. So think about 3 different angles of light. And you can see some of the bulbs are burned out. We had an interesting finding. It's the reason why the bulbs are burned out was for several reasons. One is that the supply chain was not, it wasn't set up to source new parts or to source replacement parts. We also found that they were very expensive. For example, in Delhi, a tube light, the fluorescent light that you see here, costs about $6, but that's the cheapest. We've seen it as high as $23 or $25. In Nairobi, the cost of these tube lights goes up to $65, and we've had reports that from Kampala and some of the other African cities, it can be as high as $200. Keep in mind, these are bulbs that burn out every 4 to 6 months. You have a device that takes 6 of these bulbs. So very quickly, the cost goes up. So we set out to design a new phototherapy device, and we challenged ourselves to the same 4 questions. Is it needed? We have this anecdotal data. We've talked to people. Well, we had a very interesting finding when we actually went to the global health community said jaundice actually isn't really a problem. But when we dug in, because doctors had been asking us, had been mentioning it to other organizations working in the field, we found that it's difficult to collect very rigorous data. And because it was difficult to collect rigorous data, it wasn't getting published. And because it wasn't getting published, the global health community didn't necessarily recognize it. So we worked with Stanford University to try and establish what the numbers were. And we're lucky enough that we're close to Stanford, but also one of the foremost experts in the world is there. And we learned something. We estimate that about 7 million children go untreated for jaundice every year. And if they're not treated, and I should have mentioned jaundice is time sensitive, it can result in brain damage or death. So does it work? We learned from talking to doctors, as you can imagine, we learned tons of things, but one of the things we learned was that not only should the light be very intense, but it needs to be very uniform. And what you're looking at is a heat map of how intense the light is over the footprint of the child, or the outline of a child, might be more accurate in this case. But yellow and warmer meets American Academy of Pediatrics standards. And this is what the best selling device on the Western market is. The difference is that Brilliance, our device, is set to, it's priced at $400, about 22,000 rupees in India, whereas the best-selling device on the Western market is about $4,000. Will it get to those who need it? So we learned from the Nigerian experience to build in surge protectors, or at least fuses. So Brilliance actually has fuses if the voltage goes above 330. And this is actually the picture of the first child being treated, and it was in that same hospital in Obamasha, Nigeria. We partnered with an Indian medical device firm called Phoenix, and they manufacture, distribute, and sell Brilliance. We did an interesting licensing arrangement. They're a for-profit, we're a nonprofit. How do we align our goals in getting these devices to the people who most need them? We said, okay, first we're going to cap the price because we don't want you to turn around and necessarily market at $2,500. But if you sell to a public or rural hospital, we will take minimal royalties for you. So you have a financial incentive to sell it to the hospitals and clinics that most need it. We also designed it with LEDs, and we're not the first, obviously, to design with LEDs in phototherapy, but the cool thing about LEDs is they last 5 years, not 4 to 6 months. They last 5 years before the performance starts to diminish. So you can design a higher level of light intensity even knowing that. But what this means is no maintenance, no purchasing bulbs. And then finally, I mentioned, the key thing that we learned is that the price, the affordability is the key aspect. If we want to give people choice, it has to be designed to be affordable. And so everything that's gone into this has made this a world-class product, but it's also made it with the hopes that hospitals will buy it and they'll choose to buy it. It's on the market right now in India, and I can't report at this point whether it'll be a success or not. Our goal is to treat 2 million children who wouldn't otherwise have been treated in the next 5 years. So will a thoughtful design process necessarily result in social impact? Our hope is yes. And I want to leave you with an idea. Can we use design to not just disrupt industry, but to disrupt people's expectations so that families like baby Johnson's can go to the local clinic and get world-class treatment at a price that they can afford? So thank you.